This is Jenny Kunkel, and in this video we are going to go ahead and select data from SQL Server as XML. XML is extensible markup language, and this is something that we use in SOAP web services. It's kind of a bit dated. It's kind of been replaced with REST API type services, which uses JSON. There's a lot more overhead to XML. However, it is kind of a self-describing type of format. We get a little bit from understanding the hierarchy of the tags, and it is a little bit more intuitive to read an XML document than a JSON document. It's also used as a way to communicate between different companies using electronic data interchange, and this is a pretty popular format for that. If we go to SQL Server, so we're just going to close out of this, we're going to use a little bit of a query that's going to go out and get information from the sales order header table. It's going to get the person ID from the customer table, and then the person's first name, middle name, and last name from the person table. It's going to only join and return 50 rows. That's why we're using the h.salesorderID less than 43709. If we execute this query right now, we can see that we are only returning 50 rows. We also have some rows that are being returned that have nulls, and we'll see how we can accomplish including those type of values into our XML. If we want to go ahead and create XML, we can just go ahead and do a for XML raw. This is one of the formats. There's several different types of for XML that we can do. We're going to start with the raw, and this is going to essentially give us a document here that we can double click on, and we can see that it's just a bunch of rows. Now when we look at our PowerPoint, this is showing us that there is some type of hierarchy here. We're not seeing a bunch of hierarchy with this. Everything's pretty flat and it's just row, 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 row. That's not typical for an XML document. So I'm going to close this and come back. And one of the ways that we can actually change that row is to essentially provide something that we want to call and replace that row with. And this is going to be sales order because it's more about sales order information. If we go ahead and rerun this, we should be able to double click and see that now at least those rows are sales order. It's looking a little bit better, could be better, yet still we can go ahead and add an additional attribute. This is going to be root, and we can give this a sales orders. So all of the sales orders, and it's going to make this the parent node for every one of those sales order nodes. If we execute and double click, we should be able to see that now we have the sales order with each of those sales orders underneath it. And we should also be able to see that each one of those sales order nodes has attributes. With XML, we either have attributes or we have elements. If we have attributes, it's like a key value pair. If we have elements, it's essentially where we have a little bit of a hierarchy, and you'll see that pretty soon as we start getting into some of this. Now, the next thing that we want to do is we want to actually provide another key. So we want to convert this from attributes to elements. This is going to be the other way that we can look at the data. So if I go ahead and run this, we double click, now it is looking more like our original PowerPoint that we saw, where we have the values and we have the keys, and the values are now within the tags for the keys. Now, if we notice, we have the first name, last name. We don't have a middle name. We're only returning the middle name for those nodes where there is a middle name in the database. If it's null, it's not being included. That's not generally what we want to see. If we want to go ahead and provide those, we can go ahead and add the XSI nil option. And then when we run this, we should see that every node is going to have a middle name regardless of whether it has a value. In this case, it's providing this property to indicate that it's null in the database and being returned. But in those cases where we have a value, it's still there. But each node is going to show up, because sometimes when you're trying to deal with documents, if it's missing a node, it is problematic. We can also put in the schema if we want to add the schema to this. We can just go ahead and add the XML schema. And if we rerun this, we should be able to see, once we double click, that it's essentially going to add the schema, which kind of tells what the types are, whether it's nullable, and you can see some of the sizes, etc. So the types, when it's integer, you're not going to see the size, but when it gets into some of those nvarchar and varchar fields, it's going to give max links on those fields. A little bit of information about what is contained here. Now, that pretty much is going to be the raw. There is another mode, and this is the auto mode. And let's go ahead and take a look at that. We're going to go ahead and just back it down to this, and we're going to change this raw to auto. Now, when we do this, let's go ahead and execute it. So we're only allowed to have this root. My mistake there. If we go ahead and execute this, notice that there is a little bit of correspondence here, but look at this. This looks awful. We have H, C, B. So it's essentially using our tables and how we've joined that data, and now our aliases are actually being used as that key for that particular node. That's probably not what we would want to do. We would probably want to go through and change this to sales order, this to customer, and this to person. Then if we start changing some of the stuff, so we have H's going to sales order, we're going to go ahead and move this to the next line, and this is going to be sales order as well, and sales order here. Let's go ahead and move this to the next line. We're going to change the C to customer, and then the P to person. I guess it's B in this case. Now if we rerun this and double click, it looks a little bit better because we're using those aliases for those keys for the XML nodes. Now, if we decide that we want to add the elements here, we can go ahead and do that. And if we're going to do that, we might as well just go ahead and do the nil as well. So this is going to change it from the attributes to the elements. And if we rerun this and look at it, now we can see the breakdown. This is kind of more standard than what we saw before. We have our order header being joined to the customer table. That's where we're getting our person ID. And then that person ID is being joined to the person table. And that's where we're getting our first name, middle name, and last name from. Now, if we decide that we want to do something a little bit different and we want to use some pathing for this, we can go ahead and do that. And if we go back, we can change this auto to a path. And with our path, we can actually add the sales order back. We can leave in our root node, and we can leave in our elements. And when we run this, we can see that it's pretty flat at this point. If we go back to our SQL statement, if we decide that we want to go ahead and make our sales order ID an attribute and then have everything else be elements, we can do that as well. And in this case, we would just go ahead and alias this. And when we alias it, it's going to be an at sales order ID. Once we do that, if we rerun this, we can see that now we have the sales order as an attribute, and everything underneath is going to be a element within the XML. Now the last one is a little bit more complex, and I'm going to actually just copy it in because it is very, very long. Now pasting this in, and we're going to move this down so we can actually see more of the query itself. This is going to be used with a union statement, and in our case we are going to create two different levels. We're going to create a sales order level and then a customer level. And for our customer, we want to have the person ID be an attribute, and then underneath that customer, we're going to have the first name, the middle name, and the last name be elements. And in order to do this, when we're doing that first level, anything that is not an element that is in that first level, we are going to leave out, essentially make it null that's being returned. And then when we are going to union this, this is going to get unioned with the select where the attributes are included for that second level. So in the first case, we have 1 as tag, null as parent. In the second case, we have 2 as tag and 1 as parent. And this is essentially going to allow us to configure things either as an attribute, like in this case, or an element. So we can see we have the element here. And in this case, we have the attribute and we have elements. And we're indicating here that we want this to be an element that can return the null version and include that within the XML. If we utilize this with our XML explicit, we can really tailor the output of our XML to be essentially anything that is really needed for us to do. So in this case, if we go ahead and select everything and then execute, get into the output, we can see that we have that customer, again with the attribute, and then those nodes underneath that customer, we have the sales order, and in this case it has its attribute of the ID for that sales order. So this is a really quick walkthrough of selecting data from SQL Server as XML.